All right, so a little while ago I posted on Vimeo that I would be explaining how to achieve this kind of effect where we get a flip sim that is getting increasingly more viscous based on some other things going on in the sim, mostly based on these particles' age as well as the speed that they're traveling. So this is the look that we're going to attempt to recreate in this quick walkthrough today. Hopefully it'll be quick. There are some other versions of this, some alternate versions I got that I'll show you at the end as well, and maybe talk through those a little bit. This is the one that I've ended up rendering and that was at the head of this video. So let's go ahead and dive in, and I'll show you how I achieved this. All right, then inside the .NET, I have all the standard nodes for a flip sim, mainly the flip solver, flip object, and a volume source. Hopefully you know how to set those up. If not, there's other tutorials out there, but just real quickly, I have this set up to first context geometry. And here we've got the flip object node. The only thing I've really changed on this is how the particles are displayed. By default, they're set to show sprites. I have those set to particles, and you'd have the same thing if you use the shelf tool, but if you did it manually, you might need to update that. All right, so next I've just got my static object here. That's this sort of rocky looking sphere. This is my ground plane, and I'm just going to turn those off so you don't have to see them. And next I'm gonna drop down a default flip solver and sort of walk through some of the parameters that I've changed to get where we ended up with this sim. I did up my substeps. I think my final was either 3 or 4. You can change that as you see fit. Next, what I had to do is in the particle motion tab, there's a couple attributes that we need to initialize. One's ID. I just typically always do that, and the other for this case is age. Because again, we want to control our viscosity based on how old the particles are, so we need to initialize that attribute. Next is reseeding. There's a lot of mixed feelings on reseeding. It can lead to some issues depending on what you may want to do post-sim, but I ended up turning it on to get a lot of these, you see these like tendrily kind of areas. Without reseeding, those were really breaking up so much that my meshing wasn't working, so I decided to go back and turn reseeding on, and I was really happy with the shape of the sim after that. Using reseeding and especially aggressive reseeding, you can end up with some volume gain, so just watch out for it. But in this case, I actually felt like it did a better job for me. The last thing for this reseeding tab, aside from the surface oversampling, which I've really turned up, and the surface oversampling, when you turn that up, that's sort of how you force more particles into the scene. So I used a pretty high value for that. And then as you see here, I'm also adding some other attributes into this field so that when the new particles are born, they also are inheriting the age and the viscosity of the particles around them. And you're going to need that when dealing with sims like this. And that's really all I did in the reseeding. And then the other things that you're going to need to change to get this effect to work is you need to enable viscosity, obviously. And what I've seen a lot of times is people when they start to play with viscosity in their flip sims, they hit that and then they jump over here to the physical tab and start messing with this viscosity. And that's fine. That'll get you a viscous sim, but what it will not allow you to do is to vary that over time, or to say if you had 2 or 3 emitters, you wouldn't be able to do viscosity type per emitter, like to vary that, have one that's really viscous and one that's not viscous. So rather than using this to set your viscosity, what I always do is enable viscosity by attribute, and you'll see I have that here. Okay, and then the only other thing that I did that's different than the stock flip solver is I ticked on this stick-on collision. So let me get rid of that extra one, and you'll see immediately we hit play let's see, there's my emitter, but we're getting this error. And what that's going to tell us is, hey, you told the solver saying, hey, you told me to expect a viscosity attribute and to take that into account, and there's no viscosity attribute there. So you can set that out here by any number of ways. You can do a attribute create or wrangle. You can do an attribute VOP and have noise control your viscosity. Any of those things, any of that's available to you. The way that I approached this was just to create a POP VOP. I'm going to call this viscosity create. And just to show you that this works, I'm going to do a really simple version. So to get viscosity out of here, this is the same way that this works in SOPs, is anytime you're exporting some sort of arbitrary attribute that you're creating in here that's not represented in this global output, is you do a bind export. I had to think of what it was called for a second. And then the attribute that I'm exporting is viscosity. And just get a constant. And let's say 5,000. You can see my viscosity already updated there. So now my viscosity is 5,000 across the board. Let me hop out for 1 second. This sim is going a little bit slowly because of the settings I had to make the high-res sim for the render. Let's hop back in here. Yep, you'll see. So now you've got a really viscous sim. So I do that just to show that you can set the viscosity attribute within a POP VOP, and it totally works. And setting this in line with your emitters is typically how I do it. Now you can see, I'll show you. You can also you can plug this in here, volume velocity. It'll work the same way. Viscosity is 5,000. And with the solver, this may actually be doing something different than just putting it in line. Visually, to me, they look the same. I haven't done flipbooks and compared the two because it just doesn't matter to me at this point. But the reason I do it in line here is because if I had 2 or 3 of these emitters, I may want to do these to give them different values. So that's why I do it. And then if this were the case, you would just merge them in together and then have that. But again, that's not what we're doing right now. But this is why I set it up this way. So to get back to sort of the meat of what we're doing, we want our particles to get more viscous the older they are, which is what we did here. But we're dealing with such low values. We're dealing with the age, which is going to be from 0 to frame 240, 10 seconds. It's never going to get viscous enough. So what we want to do is we want to fit that range. And our source minimum, this is our age, is 0 to 10. And our destination maximum, I'm actually going to leave at 1. Reason being is I don't want this to be a 1-to-1 correspondence, like a linear response to the age. I want that to be a really ramped response. So I'm going to get a ramp parameter, and I'm going to change this to spline type. And this ramp, it always expects a 0 to 1 value. So that's why I changed this 0 to 1. I'm going to call this age ramp, and this one I'm actually going to call age ramp as well. And that's good. And then coming out of this, I want another fit range, because I don't want my final viscosity to be 0 to 1. I want to have more control over that. So I'm going to promote these parameters, rename them. This is going to be minimum viscosity, maximum viscosity, and this range is going to be really high at 10,000. And that's the basic setup. So we hop out here, and what you're going to see is right now it's a pretty linear response. You know, you see your age is 1.125, your viscosity, like, yeah, it's just really, it's like a linear multiplier. And again, that's because of this ramp. What I want, and it's also because my maximum viscosity is still 1. I want this maximum viscosity to be 10,000. And I want my minimum viscosity maybe to be 5. I don't want it to be completely non-viscous, but I don't want it to. I want to really see a difference when when we ramp this. So now we're getting more viscous values the older the particles are, but it's not dramatic enough. So let's start playing with this ramp to see. I think the way that I've wrapped my head around these ramps, at least in this example where this ramp is representing the age of a particle, you can kind of think about it as a timeline. Like, this is the beginning of my timeline, this is the end of my timeline, and the lighter value here is the amount of viscosity. So I want my particles to be really non-viscous up until about maybe a third to a half of their life. And I don't want it to be a linear ramp up. I want it to like really ramp up. So let's see if this is doing anything that I expect it to do. The other thing that I neglected to mention earlier, in my guide section of this flip object, I have, this is default set to velocity. I changed this to viscosity and changed the range just so that it's easier to see what we're dealing with. So right now these are really dark blue, meaning they're very low viscosity. And as they start to turn white, that's going to represent a higher viscosity. Let's see if they actually turn white. And they should be, yeah, up here they're starting to go. Here they're starting to go. So we can see that our age attribute, when these are getting to be about 2.5, 3 seconds, we're at about 2,000 for our viscosity. Our maximum's 10,000, so we still got quite a ways to go. But I say we have quite a ways to go, but you know, as we reach this point, it's gonna that curve is much steeper. So you're gonna see these start to turn bright white pretty fast. All right, that's enough for just right now. And you can see this is already looking really nice. As the particles, as they slow down, as they get older, they're really starting to solidify. It's kind of looking like wax that gets increasingly cooler over time and hardens up. You can change the look of this mostly with your ramp. You know, if you want that to start earlier and you want it to take a lot longer to really get solid, you can spread this ramp out some. We'll see how that looks. One of the other things, I'm just going to talk over this just to save some time. One of the other things I did in the example that I rendered was I didn't want this to only respond to age. I used a speed multiplier as well. I'll hop in and show you how to set that up. It gets a little more finicky to adjust, but it's something that's interesting enough to maybe talk about. And I think this is already looking pretty nice. You can kind of see where it's going. The fade from really basically non-viscous to really viscous is taking a lot longer. Again, just because we spread out, made that curve a bit longer. So we're still getting these kind of cool looking tendrils that are falling down. And at some point when they reach probably about half of their total age, they just get totally solid, and you'll start to see it happen over here. So I'm going to call this viscosity create age only, and make a copy of it. I was going to do a switch, but I'll just turn it off. It doesn't matter. All right, I'll hop back to the beginning so it doesn't take so long. And this is going to be viscosity create age and speed. But I'll probably visualize it just by speed only. So you can't really, there's no speed, there's no speed attribute, and you can't access that directly, but you can calculate it with one node, length node. If you look at the help card for this, it says it generates the magnitude of a vector. You watch enough people using Houdini, you kind of know that if you take the length of your velocity, that'll give you your speed. Now, what I need to know before I go much further with this is I need to know what my maximum speed is going to be. So just a quick way to do it, just to see what's happening, is I pumped that straight into viscosity just because I'm already looking at it in my geometry spreadsheet. And so now my speed is basically equal to my viscosity. And it looked like I saw an 11 in there, but it looks like, yeah, there was a 12 or 13 for some really fast moving particles. But generally it's around 10, 12, something like that. So I'm going to get another fit range, because what I want to do is I want to do the same thing I did with age, and I want to ramp this in. So I need to get from whatever my minimum speed to my maximum speed and remap that from 0 to 1. So I'm just going to do this at 12 to see what happens. We can come back and change it if we need to. Then get another ramp parameter. I do want to change this to spline. I want to call this a speed ramp. Label it as such. Speed ramp. Drop that in. And then I want to take the same fit range. I'm going to reuse it right now and then take this to my viscosity. So now the one gotcha with this, and we'll correct it outside in the ramp. What this is set up to do right now is to adjust the viscosity based on the speed. So this is saying, hey, the faster these things go, like the higher speed, the higher the viscosity you want. And we actually want the inverse of that. We don't want the particles to be more viscous the faster they're going. I want them to be really non-viscous until they slow down. Like when they collide with something, then I want them to get more and more viscous. So the way to do that is just to invert the values of this ramp. Okay, so instead of going from, like we did with the age, this response of like when something's really young, it's also not very viscous. Now this is saying when something goes really slow, which is this side of the ramp, be really viscous, and when it's really fast, be not so viscous. And again, I want this to be a pretty harsh ramp. So let's take this way down here and just see what happens. You can see like these particles, when they're first birthed, they have no velocity. So that's why they're getting white up here. And then as they hit the surface, as they collide, they're also ramping into their higher viscosity, which is, it's exactly what I want. Now you can play with this curve to get better looks by all means. And you can also take your minimum viscosity. Right now we had it at 5, but if we turn that all the way down to 0, now these particles have no viscosity whatsoever. So when they hit, you get some nice splashes, even some particles flying off the edge there to form their own droplets. You get those really fine tendrily kind of motion. And as these particles keep piling up with no viscosity colliding with the ones that are really viscous and solid, you get a really cool like splash coming over the edge. And one of the interesting things with this is that because this is purely based on speed, some of these particles, when they initially hit, they're going to start to get viscous, but as some other particles push them around, they're going to get less and less viscous. And these ones in particular that are flying off the edge here, as they're coming down here, maybe they were viscous at some point in time up here, but as they're picking up speed, they're getting less and less viscous. And then when they hit the ground, they're going to solidify again. So you can get some pretty interesting looking effects with this. Now this is pretty sparse. So that's obviously not going to mesh very well. You can dial that back in with some surface tension and also reducing this back down. I'll reduce it back down just to see what it's going to look like. It'll take a second, but I thought it was looking kind of cool. And I'll just keep talking while this is going. The interesting thing about this is it's like everything in Houdini. The principle doesn't only apply to flip sims. You know, if you're in your POP net and you've got particles flying and when they reach a certain speed, you would like them to freeze. You can drive the mass attribute by the speed or by age, and you can get so many different interesting looking effects with this concept. This concept is not so much different than the shelf tools that these cool within and these heat within objects will allow you to sort of, or this melt shelf tool. It's kind of the same idea. That doesn't apply to emitting objects. But in essence, it creates some nodes that will update the viscosity based on the temperature of other objects and how they transfer from one another. So when you really start to wrap your head around, when you really get deep into Houdini, what you start to see is that everything that you do is just attributes on points in space, or attributes on primitives in space. And when you can wrap your mind around that, you start to unlock all these avenues for creating really interesting work. So I'm going to stop this here. This is enough to see what's happening, and this is not so interesting of a sim. But you get this huge splash, and then where these particles have slowed down, their viscosities are really, really high. All right. So not only can you do these things on their own, let me just do this. I'll just call this one speed only, and then I'll do one that's both viscosity, age, speed, and I'll enable that. And I don't want my minimum viscosity to be 0. I still want that to be 5. And then what you can do in here, I'm going to plug this back up to the age so that my age is the main thing that's driving it. And you can flip-flop it whichever way you want, but you can also just make your speed a multiplier. So now my speed is a straight multiplier of my age. So the viscosity is going to be related to the age, but then it's also going to be multiplied by the speed value. So the only thing that's sort of a gotcha of this is, and maybe we'll just fix it one level up. I don't want my, let me just run it and see. I don't want my viscosity to ever be reset to 0. I always want it to be whatever the viscosity is based on the, yeah, that's not working. Let me just do I want a little bit off script here. This is a little bit different than the way I set up some of my other stuff. So I want this to be 1 and maybe 10. So now what I'm doing is I'm taking this ramped speed and saying the minimum value that it'll ever be is 1, which is what this these line of nodes up here, that's what that's calculating, is this viscosity. And then I'm saying, okay, whatever that viscosity is up here, the least it'll ever be is this, but the most it'll ever be is this times 10 times the speed. I hope that makes sense. Sometimes this stuff is really clear in your mind, and then when you start to try to verbalize it, it gets muddy. So I hope that's not the case with this. Let's see what we got. So you see our age, this viscosity is mainly driven by age, and it's being multiplied by how fast things are going. I'm going to let this one sim out because I think it's going to look kind of nice. And my final version that I did render ended up, it was this setup, some variation of ramps and maybe a different value in that final fit range on the speed multiplier. but it's something pretty similar. And this is actually looking really nice as well. It's once you get the basic setup of it, it's kind of hard to go wrong. You can get a lot of cool looking stuff, a lot of cool variations with just playing with a few values. It's also easy to screw yourself by you get something you like and cache it and then come back in and forget to make a copy or save up or something and mess with your ramps. And once you mess with these ramps, it's almost impossible to get it exactly where you were. So be careful if you find something you like and you cache it out, save your project, or make a duplicate of your POP VOP. However you work, just make sure that you're careful before you start tweaking stuff after you found something you like, because it's really difficult to get it right back. And I ran out of RAM, but this is looking great. I'm really happy with this, and I might render this version as well. So actually what I'm going to do is I will pause the recording and I'll cache this out just so we can look at it. So here we go. And I think it'll play back. There's a lot of really nice stuff going on with this combination of using the speed and the age to control the viscosity. What I really like is these kinds of moments where you get a nice sheeting. You get a good splash from having minimal viscosity at the beginning, and then you still get this kind of cool sheeting, which you kind of see right here. I think that one little area is my favorite part. I'm actually gonna really quick. I'm gonna pump this through to the meshing phase. The meshing and rendering is not something that I'm gonna cover in this walkthrough, but I do want to just take a look at what this looks like. I should have made note of what frame that was. Yeah, and I'm gonna save what I've got, and I'm gonna see if I can fire off a Redshift render while I am streaming this. Yeah, that's looking really good, really nice. I didn't mean for it to, but it actually looks like it's like the same colors as all of Autodesk's screen, or their splash screens. Looks like a goopy Maya logo or something. But yeah, so that's the meat of it. Is you see how, I'll leave this over there so I'll just talk over that. You see how you can set up all inside of DOPS just with simple tools that probably most Houdini users are really familiar with. Inside of a VOP, you can grab attributes like speed and age, and really anything you can think of. Any attribute that's available to you inside DOPS, you can manipulate that within a VOPnet and pump that into your viscosity and get some really interesting looking effects. So thank you so much for checking this out. I will make this project file available on Gumroad. I'll have a link to that where it's easy to find. I'm really just getting started out making these tutorials. I hope that people are finding them helpful. Maybe I'll say this: if I get a significant increase in followers on or subscribers on YouTube or followers on Vimeo, I'll unlock this project file on Gumroad. Maybe that's an incentive for to get some new followers. And honestly, like the more feedback I get, it's easier for me to keep going with this stuff. If I find that if I find that it's useful, I'm all for continuing to put the time into it. But it does take a lot of time. So thanks so much for watching. You can check out this and my other tutorials on Vimeo, YouTube. I try to put stuff out on Twitter. And you can check out my website, whatifound.net. You'll find links to all the social sites there so you can stay updated. I'm trying to add more content to that, tutorials, tips, tools that I create or find. And I'm also going to start using that as sort of a dumping ground for links to resources that I've found really helpful through the years. So please check that out. Let me know what you think. And thanks again for watching.